Scott McNair, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Overrule Podcast brought to you by the Scott Vignier Law Firm. I am David Vignier, your co-host, along with my co-host and law partner, Bradley Scott. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. I feel like an honored guest since I'm doing this via Zoom today.
It's weird looking at you on not Zoom, Riverside. Riverside is the name of this program. Get your facts straight, sir.
We're making it work.
No, we have a good topic to talk about today. Very interesting topic, which is probably on everybody's mind who follows sports. NIL. Brad, tell us a little bit about NIL and what it is for those of us who have been living under a rock and don't know anything about NIL.
Well, NIL's been around since I think around mid 2021 when the college administrators allowed this to start happening. But these are college athletes are now being able to receive funds and money for their name, their image, and their likeness. So essentially, let's use a simple example. Deion Sanders' son, who's a quarterback at Colorado, he's able to do a deal with Nike now.
Shedeur Sanders, yes.
What's that?
His name's Shedeur Sanders.
Yes. But he's able to do a deal with Nike and get paid to do commercials and things like that, where in the past, these kids could not use any of these they're the image to promote themselves and make money. I think his deal is worth, I think it's the top one's like $6.5 million or something crazy like
with
that.
With Nike alone, he's getting $6.5 million?
I think it's multiple advertisers, but in total, his NIL package is worth like $6.5 million.
Is that a year or over so many years? Do you know? I'm just curious.
I'm not sure. I just saw the stat that's what it was valued at. But we'll make sure people understand who don't follow this stuff. The kids are not being paid by the colleges to play ball. That's not how this works. They're just allowed to receive revenue from other sources to be paid to do basically advertising, just like endorsements and things like that. And even us, our firm has some NIL deals. You may want to highlight those with some of the student athletes that we use. But that's kind of the setup and how this stuff is working, and this is where it's coming from. It all stems from a lawsuit, a class action that happened in the early 2000s by a UCLA student who basically sued to be compensated. The school was using his likeness to make money off of him, and he thought he should be paid for it. Forgot what the result of that was, but that put in motion this whole conversation whether student athletes should be paid. Because that's the big difference between professional athletes and amateur athletes, like college athletes, is being able to be paid for their time and their production on the field.
And everybody knows the high-profile one that just happened, especially being in South Louisiana, that Bryce Underwood, the number one recruit for this college cycle, was committed to LSU. He lives and plays about 30 minutes outside of Ann Arbor in Michigan. And he flipped at the very last minute, like a week or two before, and nobody could really blame the kid because Michigan offered him this NIL deal, not Michigan itself, but there was an NIL deal tethered to him going to Michigan, which was like $12 million over 4 years, something like that. And it involved both Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports connecting with, is it Larry Ellison, who was of Oracle? I'm looking at Miles.
Yes.
I know he knows the story.
Yeah.
Larry Ellison of Oracle partnered with Dave Portnoy, I think because Larry Ellison's wife is a Michigan alum, and they put this NIL package together. I don't know if they both funded it totally or if there were other people who came in. Of course, he's a billionaire. And so it is now impacting the entire segment of recruiting in college athletics. And I even saw one kid on signing day who's like, I really wanted to go to Florida State, but ended up going to LSU because probably I don't know for sure, but he said something along the lines of, I wish I could have gone to Florida State. And nobody, the coaches who lose these athletes and the ones who get them, none of the coaches can really blame them. Like if there's a package which is just impossible financially for them to pass up, it is what it is, right?
And that's kind of the conversation for today, and kind of why we were bringing it up is, now you're seeing money have a very direct impact on the competitiveness in college sports. The talented players who are going to get these deals are going to be flowing where they're getting the biggest, hate to use the word paycheck, but where they can monetize their NIL deals as much as possible. So, what's going to happen with this?
Are you in favor of it?
I have mixed feelings about it. I don't like college sports being commercialized at all. Because I like the amateur nature of it, the pure competitiveness of it. But the problem is even before NIL, it was already commercialized.
Right.
This is big business. These schools
100%.
are making tons of money in TV contracts and all these merchandising deals. There's already money in the system. So then the question becomes is who's going to benefit from that money in that market? It makes sense that the students have a share of that. They are the product more or less. But at the same time now you created this whole dynamic of Now it's a business. These kids aren't necessarily going to school for academics. They're going to school potentially to monetize their NIL deals. And now you have this extra problem of talent floating to where they're going to get paid the most. So that begs the question now, and I know it's been kicking around a lot, and we've talked about it a little bit before, is though now do we have to implement salary caps or something of that nature where schools can be competitive with each other? Because a smaller market school simply is not going to have the money or and again, we talk in terms of the schools are not paying these athletes, but the deals that are going to be available to students in smaller markets are not the same as in bigger markets. So you're going to have this talent pool is going to be drawn out to these bigger markets, just like you've had in professional baseball. Now, NFL have addressed this issue by doing salary caps.
Well, there's got to be some answer, right? Like I hate to piss my dad off or Pam Cornetta if you're listening, but I hate the Yankees. I can't stand it. I hate it in Major League Baseball that they can just buy championships. Sorry, it's the truth. And so there's got to be some... I don't really understand the salary cap or how Mickey Loomis figures out that we're like $100,000 in dead deals under the NFL paradigm and somehow we start restructuring. I don't understand any of that crap because I'm not paid to understand it, but I think there's got to be some type of solution. I don't know if it is truly a salary cap, but it's got to be some solution that makes all of the teams somewhat competitive. But I think the dilemma is going to be in college athletics, unlike the NFL or the NBA, there are just so many teams. There are so many universities, and there's just not enough, like in the NBA, for example, there's only 30, 32, 36, whatever teams, right? And so there is easier to regulate how much money each market can spend amongst 32 teams. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of colleges that play football, basketball. It's almost going to be impossible. I don't know the answer, but I think it's going to be impossible to figure out a salary cap system that works with so many schools and not an infinite amount of money to flow between them all.
Yeah. And again, remember, this is not money flowing into the schools. This is money flowing into the deals of the student athletes.
The other dilemma.
So what you're basically, I don't have an answer. I don't know what you do with this, but basically what you'd be doing is limiting the student athletes in the contracts they can sign externally to the outside of playing for marketing and advertising. So, a salary cap, whatever it looks like, would only penalize the student athlete. It's not going to penalize the school in any way. So it's a really tough nut to crack as far as how you solve this problem now that you introduce that element and that variable into it.
Well, I personally love NIL, and so I understand all the criticisms of it as well as the challenges that it poses. But from my perspective, at least, just like you said, Brad, this was big business. It has been big business. It always was big business for the universities, which already have huge endowments and money from state grants and things like that anyways. And when it relates to college athletics and big business like the University of Texas, LSU, Alabama, these big universities who are making big money in their athletic departments, primarily in the football programs, believe it or not, you start reading Sports Illustrated analyses of these things. Most of their programs, besides football and basketball, lose money. But those are big money generators, and they've already been making tons of money off these athletes and not paying them. I think it's ridiculous. It was already a business. The university started it, so I am all for NIL. Get money in these kids' pockets. And from my perspective, the second part of it, why I'm so in favor of it, it's like every time a university would come to me, and it mostly is just smaller local universities who wanted sponsorships from the law firm or donations to get like marketing with the athletic department. First of all, I think it's not really good marketing to begin with, and that's a whole different discussion. We go down like a rabbit hole of it not being not good
marketing from a sense that we're not going to monetize it, but we do it from the sense of trying to give back.
100%. I would do it to give back to the school, but it's not going to be good marketing from the standpoint of like, what else can I do with my money to? And one of the things I'm always worrying about is to maximize each of our respective marketing budgets.
We're spending that money not to get clients. We're spending that money to support the schools.
100%. And from my perspective, I love NIL because I love giving that marketing money directly to the student athlete who needs it much more than the university and the athletic department, who appreciates it much more than the university and athletic department. And as a person who is involved in NIL, and we're actively signing more and more athletes, it allows us to develop a relationship with that student athlete, even if it's surface level, even if it's just about money. It allows them to develop a relationship with us, which is important to us. And then the athletes, I also think they get a little feel, a little understanding of business, of marketing, while they're making some.
For them, absolutely, it's getting them into the business world. It's part of their academic education.
No question about it. They're learning what actually matters. They're negotiating. A lot of times we've had many athletes that we talked to that we didn't sign. I was like, good luck. It's like, if you don't want the deal that we are willing to pay, then that's kind of how the world works. Everything's a market, and that's a good thing. And so I think it's like, I think it's a great learning experience for all of them. I've loved it. Miles is like probably rolling his eyes behind there right now. I'm looking over at him. I'm like, we need to sign more, and like more women athletes, more different athletes, track and field, all this stuff. Because it's just been a lot of fun generating that content and having that experience and interacting with all these incredible student athletes. So I am like all in NIL. I love NIL. I think it's awesome. But I also just recognize the inherent challenges it poses. And having many friends who are very ardent Ole Miss fans, for example, not to call out the Rebels, but, this year didn't work out as they hoped, right? But they were like, this was their experiment to see if they could buy a national championship. Because they went all in on the portal. They spent a ton of NIL money. They felt like with Jackson Dart, they had like a national championship quarterback. And I think there are still, right, like inherent challenges to buying a team through NIL in the portal. Because, look, they lost 3 games. They didn't make the playoff, even though they probably had superior talent to a lot of the teams that they lost to, including but not limited to LSU and Kentucky. But they still didn't make it happen. So
the same thing goes in professional sports. You have Major League Baseball teams who have 10 times the budget of some of the smaller market teams, but they don't always win the World Series. It does come down to chemistry and teams like that. And kind of going back to the whole thing is, what are we giving up by having the NIL deals in place? I think the casualty here, the cost of this is going to be some level of competitiveness because I think it's just a natural consequence when you introduce money to the students. The students are going to follow where the more money is. That's going to be in the bigger markets, the bigger schools. So you're going to start seeing an accumulation of that talent into those particular schools. But at the same time, if you have those top 5%, top 1% student athletes, they were going to these bigger schools anyway from the beginning, more than likely through scholarship deals.
No question about it.
So are we really upsetting the apple cart, so to speak, with this? I don't like the uptick in transfer portal activity that's based purely on NI deals, getting a better deal somewhere else. That rubs me the wrong way. The kids are, you're supposed to be going to school for academics first, and moving in the middle of their education and going somewhere else just because I'm getting more money doesn't seem to be why we're supposed to be in college and doing this stuff to begin with. And that's the part that doesn't sit well with me, but I think it's a natural consequence of what we've created by having the NIL in play now.
I mean, I would argue, however, that the concerns you just shared or elucidated about, you don't think they're just going to the university for the wrong reasons. They were doing it already. I mean, unfortunately, irrespective of statistics showing whether it's football, basketball, baseball, that this percentage of student athletes, no matter how talented they are actually going to make it through the minor leagues in baseball or going to actually make it to a 53-man roster in the NFL. They all still, before NIL, were thinking, but I'm in the small percentage, when the reality of it was many of them were not going to be in that small percentage, and that what they were going to end up relying on was falling back on their education, irrespective of whether they got paid through NIL or not. So from my perspective, that no different than the other item you mentioned, being that everybody, the top 5% of athletes were already going to the University of Michigan's, the LSU's, the University of Texas, the University of Florida. That was already happening organically without NIL tethered to them going there. I just think there's money now. And maybe it will enhance the clustering of those athletes at those particular universities. But look, once again, like, it is a market. University of Colorado was not on the radar before Dion decided to show up there.
True.
And
He's done wonders for the program.
Yeah,
and he brought attention. Attention, money follows attention. It's just the way the world
no
works.
question about it. His son's a star. Travis Hunter just won the Heisman, a star. They have a lot of attention because their playing abilities and their star power, and money's following that because they got eyeballs. And so the major, like, we're a tiny little speck of an NIL player in comparison to Nike and Coca-Cola and Powerade, right? Like these Fortune 500 behemoth corporations. Those are serious NIL players who are offering serious money, and they're buying eyeballs, right? So.
Yep. But at the end of the day, with NIL introduced now, college sports is completely business from top to bottom. Money is going to drive a lot of decisions, both on the athlete side and the college side. It's just not amateur sports anymore. I don't think we can look at it that way. If we keep trying to cling to the amateur sports status of it, we're going to be disillusional about this whole thing the whole time. I think we almost got to accept that this is minor league sports at some level. It's professional sports. They're being technically paid to be out there at some level, whether it's scholarships or NIL deals. It's not the wholesome college academic, competitive sporting arena that we had 20, 30 years ago anymore. That's gone. And I don't think we're going back to it anytime soon.
I respectfully disagree, and I'll tell you why I do. So I don't think there's enough money to fully destabilize that dynamic across every single program at every university. Yes, I think there's a ton of money that is going to pollute college football because it's
You're right, and that my comments are mostly gauged towards football being the big ticket item.
And I think in some respects probably certain college basketball. But even, like, you look, we're in Louisiana, so I'm once again use LSU. You look at the LSU women's basketball team, there's a ton of publicity over how much money Angel Reese made in NIL. Good for her. She was a star. But there's not that kind of money paying that many Angel Reeses in women's college basketball.
Caitlin Clarks and people like that, yeah, you're going to have those big names.
Correct. So I don't think it is, I get what you're saying, but I do think because there's just so many programs. You got softball, you got women's softball, you got women's track, men's track. I mean, there's just not enough money to pollute all of the college athletic programs fully.
Completely agree with you. There is a distinction to be made between the marquee sports and the other sports programs. I don't think it's infiltrated the other sports programs like the comment that I made.
And guess what? Coincidentally, which I think is just an opinion of mine, the sports it is going to change and affect the most, we're circling back to, were the two programs that are really where the profit is found at these larger and successful universities. Football, men's basketball. That's where they're making a ton of profit and where their athletic departments make a lot of money. And that's where a lot of the NIL money is going. So the sponsorship is following the most profitable teams in the university's athletic programs. I think that's once again just market driven.
Absolutely. I just can't imagine being in college as a college age student walking around where you're making $3-4 million a year. How that impacts your day-to-day life. And I don't know if I want to go to class if I'm making that kind of money.
Oh, no question about it. I think the worst, too, though, is like I don't know, and I hope, and I wish, having discussed this topic, this isn't something I really looked into as a subset of this topic. I hope, much like the NFL, there was a focus 10 years ago, even though the players still don't listen, there was a focus on financial education and what to do with money when you come into this kind of money when you don't have it. The simplest is, hey, take as much of it, 80 or 90% of it, put it in a low-cost index fund with Vanguard, and forget that you even have it. Who's telling these kids in college who are getting real money? Are there any type of courses being taught on it? I hope. I don't know the answer to that, but, for them, the other reason I'm now that we're like going down this rabbit hole, I'm a huge proponent of it, is the power of compound interest for these kids at 18 to 21 years old to come into $1 million, $2 million after taxes. If they just shove that in an index fund and never touch it again and say, you know what, I'm not going to be lured into buying that G-Wagon that looks like crap anyways, and I'm going to invest this money, they will never have to worry about money again because of the power of compound interest.
Just as a disclaimer, the information provided by Mr. Vignair does not constitute financial advice, and you should not rely on that advice. We are not licensed financial professionals.
And we probably should redact that last comment so I don't get sued by defamation by Mercedes-Benz.
But the point being is this. I mean, look at some of these professional athletes, and there's horror stories throughout history of these athletes coming into money, professional athletes, and squandering it and having nothing left. Now you're taking money, large sums of money, and you're giving it to still kids. 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, is the structure going to be in place? Maybe these kids shouldn't be allowed to have this money immediately. Maybe this money be paid into trust on their behalf that they can pay out over time. Maybe there needs to be some structure in how the finances are happening so these kids actually have a chance once they get out of college to bank on some of this money, because that's a big concern of mine, especially as an estate planning attorney. I see it all the time where kids and people come into inheritance, and a lot of times what I'm creating is structure for them not to screw it up. Protect them from themselves. So that's a big concern, how that money's floating through college campuses now, and how it's being used, and how, if there's any planning in place to help these athletes protect those dollars.
Yeah, and I think that's something I learned from you and a lot of the testamentary trusts that you set up, meaning when somebody you draft a will for somebody and they put a trust in it, whether it be for life insurance proceeds or other monies. And the concept is you stagger out the divestment of the trust, meaning you have $1 million that flows into this trust from a life insurance policy. But maybe because you died unexpectedly, the kid was 10 years old. Who's going to give $1 million to a 10-year-old? It's like you divest the principal being paid out at 25, 30, 35, 40 years old of age for the beneficiaries. And so it's like the same type of concept you're throwing out there, that maybe there needs to be an NIL structured trust because they're so young to have that kind of money. But I could beat that up all day and come up with a different argument and be like, let them have their money. They earned it right now. The athletic department.
Let them do what they want with it. Just, I just hope they're not wasting these dollars. Because, as a college student with that kind of money, I can only imagine the trouble I could have gotten into.
I've looked at Shadur's gold necklaces enough to know they probably cost more than a lot of things.
My vehicle.
Yeah, they don't look fake. Now, I would say, Shadur, if that's not real gold and you were smart enough because you like the bling and you just have a fake one to have the view, good for you. I hope you've invested the money smartly. But I'm nervous that it's real gold and you've wasted some of it on that thing. And
he can probably afford it with his dad, though. Fair. He's not hurting to begin with.
Fair point. But there's something about having your own money and protecting your own money.
So at the end of the day, I think, NIL's, the genie's out of the bottle with NIL. You're not going to take it back. It's in play now. We've had 20 plus years of trying to get here. So the question is now, moving forward, how do these college academic people regulate this? How do we make it work for everybody? And what are going to be the casualties of all this? Is it going to be the competitiveness between the schools? Is that going to suffer? It's kind of the Wild West right now. It's still really early into this thing. We're only kind of 3+ years into it. It's going to be interesting to watch it develop over the next decade or so and what happens to it. But there are a lot of concerns. At the same time, there's a lot of money flowing into some pockets that there wasn't going into before. What's your final thoughts on this?
My final thought is I do think that this is going to continue to develop. I think it's been interesting to watch it happen. One thing I've seen some of the smaller market, not as high eyeball universities do. You would say Texas or LSU or Georgia. They have way more eyeballs nationally, regionally. Ohio State. I
noticed you did not mention Alabama intentionally.
Well, I did mention them earlier, and then I felt bad immediately because who lives in Louisiana and doesn't hate Alabama? If you do, you don't, then I don't know, something's wrong with you. But I think that what I have seen is Tulane, or old CUSA schools, University of Houston, even as high profile as, and I know most of them have this now, but I think the answer to combat it a bit for those types of programs is to develop and organize collectives where they get the donors and the alumni to contribute significant amounts of money into an NIL collective, which becomes like an athletic endowment of sorts, where they invest the money to where it continues to grow, and they can distribute it out to specific players in a collective fashion to at least make them competitive, because they don't have like a Larry Ellison sitting in their pocket who's worth $2 or $3 billion and can just be like, yeah, I'll pay $10 million to get this player, or that type of thing. So I think that's one thing I've seen that's helped make them more competitive, and the university can marshal that resource and organize it and get more donations for it. But it's just been fun to watch where it goes, and I think it's going to continue to develop, and there's just going to be money in sports now, which I think is a good thing.
It's going to be interesting, and it's only going to grow from here. I think what you're looking at as far as NIL deals and the amounts are just going to continue to go up over time. So, if we're having this conversation in 10 years from now, we might be talking about $10 to $20 million NIL deals for athletes. And, how does that change the complexion of things in the future? So it's good they need to think it through, get some structure in place now, because it's only going to get bigger.
Couldn't agree more. Well, it's been a great discussion, Brad. Thanks so much to everybody who's listened to this. As we talked about, it's just an interesting topic to follow, and one that we're personally involved with because we have NIL athletes who represent the firm on an annual basis, and we've had a lot of fun with it. Thank you all once again for listening. This has been the Overruled Podcast, brought to you by the Scott Vignair Law Firm. On behalf of myself, David Vignair, and my co-host, Brad Scott, thanks for following us along. We'll see you next time.
Y'all take care.
Scott Vignair, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.